Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. While vacationing in Hawaii, I got a text that changed everything, a photo of a massive pool party on my private land. HOA banners, music, and smiling neighbors, all celebrating on property I never gave them permission to touch. They thought I wouldn't fight back. They were dead wrong. My name is Thomas Randall. I'm 40 years old, a software engineer by trade, and more importantly, someone who values space, privacy, and the simple joy of being left alone. After years of coding in tight startup offices and navigating the urban jungle, I finally managed to secure what I used to call my patch of peace, a 25-acre property on the outskirts of Charlottesville, Virginia. No HOAs, no neighbors peering over fences, no surprise inspections because someone didn't like the color of my mailbox. Just me, my family, and the land. From day one, I made it clear I was not joining the Sunnybrook Rise HOA, the residential development that had crept up just over my southern boundary like a too friendly neighbor overstaying their welcome. I received the welcome packet, the charming brochures, the friendly visits from their board members, most notably a sharply dressed, perpetually smiling woman named Karen Merrill. She wore pearls like armor and spoke of community values with the fervor of a preacher on Sunday morning. But I politely declined 3 times in writing, certified mail. I even framed the final notarized refusal and hung it in my office like a trophy. I wasn't being petty. I was protecting my autonomy. Legally, geographically, and contractually, my land stood outside their jurisdiction. That boundary line wasn't just a property marker. It was a wall I had no intention of letting anyone climb. Over the years, I kept my end of the unspoken agreement. I didn't complain when HOA landscapers mowed a little too far over the line. I didn't say a word when their block parties got loud or when their fireworks singed my tree line. I figured it was the cost of living near suburbia. As long as no one crossed into my space in any serious way, we were fine. The southern portion of my property, the area closest to Sunnybrook, was a bit wild, undeveloped, rolling hills, grass that danced with the wind, a small thicket of oaks and pines. I had plans for it, maybe a vegetable garden or a small orchard, or just a walking trail for the kids. It wasn't a wasteland, it was potential, but it turns out someone else saw it differently. HOA residents began casually referring to that part of my land as the open field, like it was a shared meadow. Kids wandered across it to chase butterflies. Teens used it as a shortcut to the main road. At first, I let it go. It felt harmless. But then I heard someone call it the community green space. Excuse me? Still, I didn't make a fuss. I set up subtle private property signs, small, tasteful, just enough to remind people. I figured that would settle it. But nothing prepared me for what happened next. It was our first real vacation in years. My wife and I had finally pulled the trigger on a trip to Maui with the kids. 2 blissful weeks of sun, sand, and no Slack notifications. We were staying in a beachfront cottage, eating too much poke, and I was slowly unlearning the muscle memory of checking email every 5 minutes. The ocean was warm, the air smelled like hibiscus and salt, and for a while it felt like nothing in the world could reach me. Then came the message. It was from Greg, my neighbor back in Virginia. A solid guy, retired firefighter, lived just across the northern ridge of my property. We occasionally traded favors, and I once helped him replace his router, so I figured it was something casual. The preview on my phone read, "Hey, you cool with this?" There was a photo attached. I tapped it, and I froze. There, clear as daylight, was the southern stretch of my property, the same stretch I'd left wild and untouched, but now it looked like a scene from a damn festival. A massive, in-ground swimming pool had been installed, fully constructed, filled, glistening blue. All around it, tents, lawn chairs, banners, fencing, even a mobile cocktail bar. On the main banner, printed in bold summer colors, were the words, "Sunnybrook Rise Ho presents Summer Bash 2025. I stared at it like it was an optical illusion. I zoomed in on the photo, trying to find my bearings. There, in the background, was my house, my backyard, my shed, my fence, and in the corner of the image, someone had written with cheerful irony, "Big thanks to the generous property owner for letting us use his beautiful land." My stomach dropped. I didn't even realize I was standing up until my phone nearly slipped from my hands. My wife asked if everything was all right, and I didn't know what to say. I just turned the screen toward her and muttered, "They built a damn pool on our land." She blinked. "I'm sorry. What?" My pulse started to climb. I could hear the blood in my ears. My thoughts went feral, half logic, half rage. This had to be a prank. A prank? Or maybe some kind of temporary setup. Maybe they just placed things on the edge by mistake. But no, that pool was dug deep, poured in with concrete, surrounded by installed electrical fixtures. This wasn't a slip-up. This was a full-on project. On my private land, my fingers flew as I messaged Greg. "Is this a joke?" His reply was instant. "Nope. Happened 3 days ago. Whole HOA crew rolled in like they owned the place. I thought maybe they cleared it with you." Cleared it with me? I laughed. A dry, bitter sound. My kids looked up from their tablets. My wife was already grabbing my laptop. Inside, something snapped. It wasn't just the trespass. It was the entitlement, the arrogance, the audacity to not only invade my land while I was gone, but to act like it was a community service. I kept scrolling through the pictures Greg sent. There were people lounging with drinks, music speakers set up, HOA branded t-shirts. One image had Karen Merrill herself, mid-speech, arm outstretched like she was cutting a ribbon. I clenched my jaw so hard it hurt. This wasn't just trespassing. This was war. And the moment I got back on that plane, I knew someone was going to regret assuming silence meant consent. The moment we landed in Virginia, I didn't even wait for the bags. I left my wife and kids to grab an Uber while I rented a truck at the airport. I needed to see it with my own eyes. I needed to feel my boots on my own dirt and make sure I hadn't somehow misunderstood the situation, or worse, underestimated it. But deep down, I already knew the truth. The photos hadn't lied. As I pulled up the long gravel drive that led to my southern boundary, the horror hit me all over again. My land, my open, untouched, peaceful southern stretch, was barely recognizable. The pool was real, and not just real, it was massive. A full concrete in-ground installation with tiled edges, a shallow end with steps, and even a diving board. Someone had installed lighting fixtures anchored into poles that lined the edge like runway markers. There were speakers wired into wooden posts, music trickling through them like this was some kind of spa retreat. The field was crushed, grass trampled down, tire ruts gouged deep into the soil. Folding chairs were scattered around, food carts sat idle, and a deflated bounce house rested in the corner like the corpse of a clown. I stepped out of the truck and just stared. The silence made it worse. The birds were quiet. The cicadas had given up, and all I could hear was the soft hum of my stolen electricity feeding their illegal playground. And then, like some kind of sitcom fever dream, I saw her, Karen Merrill, president of Sunnybrook Rise HOA, stepping out from a large white tent with a clipboard in one hand and a martini in the other. And yes, she was in a floral one-piece swimsuit and a wide-brimmed sun hat, like she had just walked off the set of a mid-budget resort commercial. She spotted me and lit up with an expression that can only be described as gleeful denial. "Oh, Mr. Randall, what a surprise. I thought you were still in Maui," she called out, sipping her drink like this was a planned social. "Karen," I said, barely able to contain my voice. "What the hell is going on here?" She walked toward me, completely barefoot on my scorched grass, clipboard bobbing with every step. "You know, we weren't sure how to reach you. You didn't respond to any of our outreach about community enhancement proposals, and the Summer Bash Planning Committee was under a tight timeline." I held up a hand. "Karen, this is my land. This is not Sunnybrook's jurisdiction. And there is a goddamn pool poured into it." Karen blinked, smiled wider. "Technically, it's adjacent to the community line. But we all agreed that the space wasn't being utilized, and the board voted unanimously that it would benefit the neighborhood. You weren't using it, right? You voted to build on my property." "Well," she said, squinting up at the sun like it personally validated her logic. "It was more of an executive decision, a beautification project. And, besides, think of the resale value. Honestly, Thomas, this could double the worth of your southern parcel." "You tapped into my power grid." I snapped. "You ripped up my topsoil, damaged my drainage. You altered the landscape. You did all of this without my knowledge." Karen had the nerve to look defensive. "We assumed you'd be on board. You know how these things go. A handshake here, a little trust there. It's not like we took your house." I was speechless. Actually speechless. She waved the clipboard in front of me. "Look, the costs were shared across the HOA's Community Improvement Fund. If you're interested, we can discuss a partial reimbursement. Or, if you prefer, you could formally join the HOA. That would clean up the boundary issues, and you'd get full access to the pool, of course. I nearly laughed in her face. A dead, humorless laugh. Karen, I said, voice tight as wire, what you've done here is illegal. You've trespassed, destroyed private property, diverted utilities, and hosted a public event on land you don't own. This isn't a misunderstanding. This is a lawsuit waiting to happen. Her face faltered for the first time, just slightly. But she quickly rallied. Well, I think you're being a little dramatic. If you really feel that way, we can bring it up at next month's board meeting. But I'd really encourage you to think about the community aspect of this. Let's not make this a thing, Thomas. Oh, it was a thing. It was a $3 million thing, and I was done talking. I turned on my heel and walked straight back to the truck, pulling out my phone before I even closed the door. First call, my lawyer. Second call, the county zoning office. Third call, a drone service. Because if they wanted a war, I'd bring the Air Force. I didn't waste a second. That same night, I sat at my desk, barely unpacked from Hawaii, surrounded by legal pads, open tabs of county codes, and a voice recorder running. This wasn't just about outrage anymore. This was about building a case solid enough to crack the HOA wide open. And if I knew anything from working in software, it's that evidence wins arguments. Cold, hard data. The first to step up was Greg, my neighbor and the guy who'd sent me the initial photos. I called him over that evening and he brought a USB drive and a six-pack because apparently we were building a case and a friendship at the same time. Check this out, he said, handing over the drive. Security cam from my porch, full HD. You'll love the part where they try to back a concrete truck across your easement and get it stuck. And he wasn't exaggerating. I spent the next hour watching footage of construction vehicles lumbering over my grass, HOA volunteers in matching polos directing workers, and, yes, Karen in mirrored sunglasses giving them a thumbs up like she was leading a parade. It wasn't just Greg. Once word got out that I was fighting back, other neighbors began offering support, quietly at first, but then more confidently as they realized I wasn't backing down. Marta, who lived 2 doors down from the HOA's clubhouse, gave me footage from her doorbell cam showing Karen accepting a delivery of pool tiles and billing it through the HOA's Community Improvement Fund. I knew something was off, she said, almost apologetically. She kept saying it was for a community plaza. I didn't think that meant your field. An older couple, Dave and Linda, brought me a copy of an email chain Karen had sent to the HOA mailing list weeks before, where she referred to negotiations with the southern landowner. There were no negotiations, but that wording created the illusion of consent. Even teenagers got involved. 2 high schoolers from the neighborhood sent me drone footage they'd shot just for fun, which happened to catch workers trenching for electrical wiring, right across my boundary line. One of the kids, Jackson, even annotated the footage with red arrows and timestamps. My dad's an electrician, he said. That wiring job's a nightmare. But the real turning point came from inside the beast. A man named Owen, who had recently resigned from the HOA board, reached out to me through an anonymous email first. He asked to meet in person, and when he finally showed up, nervous, glancing over his shoulder like he was in a spy thriller, he brought a manila folder stuffed with printed spreadsheets. I was the treasurer, he said, voice low. Karen went rogue. She bypassed board votes, reclassified expenses as community emergency infrastructure, paid contractors off the books. She even had checks made out to cash. It's all here. He handed it to me and added, I'm not proud. I didn't say anything because I was afraid of her. But you're doing the right thing. That folder was a gold mine. Financial records showing unauthorized payments, altered budget lines, and even a reimbursement request for a margarita machine. All of it was damning. I forwarded everything to my lawyer, Bernard Finch, who whistled so loud I thought he'd broken a tooth. Thomas, he said, this isn't just a civil suit anymore. This is criminal, misappropriation of funds, trespassing, unauthorized construction. This woman is going down. And just to drive the nail deeper, I hired a private surveyor. He marked off the boundaries, flagged every violation in bright orange stakes, and produced a clean, certified report that showed, without doubt, the pool, electrical, plumbing, and entire event setup were well within my private land. By the end of the week, I had everything. Video, photos, emails, financial records, drone footage, and a signed witness statement. Karen had built her empire on my land, and now I was going to bulldoze it with the truth. Once everything was in place, I pulled the pin. My lawyer, Bernard, drafted a cease and desist letter so sharp it practically bled through the envelope. We had it hand-delivered to both the HOA office and Karen's home. The message was clear: vacate the property, remove the installations, and prepare for legal proceedings. Within hours, my inbox lit up like Christmas in a fuse box. But the real fireworks didn't start until the story hit the press. It began with a local blog. A small-time real estate writer picked up the headline, "HOA builds luxury pool on private land without permission." The next day, Channel 4 sent a news van. By the end of the week, I was fielding interview requests from regional outlets, podcasters, even a national talk show that wanted to do a remote segment from the pool. I declined that one, but I did give a live interview standing at the boundary line, orange survey stakes behind me, as I explained how an entire organization had decided my land was theirs to decorate. The public loved it. The scandal practically wrote itself. HOA overreach, suburban madness, and a villain with a perfect name, Karen. Karen, for her part, went on full PR offense. She held a press conference from the Sunnybrook Clubhouse with a makeshift podium surrounded by 3 potted palms and a banner that said "Unity through Community." I watched it live on Facebook as she said, with a straight face, "We acted in good faith. There was no clear signage on the property, and we believed the area was part of a shared green zone." I nearly spit out my coffee. I'd installed private property signs every 100 feet. Bright red, reflective. I even had video of the HOA volunteers removing one of them before the build. When the public turned, they turned hard. The HOA's own residents started demanding a vote of no confidence. Anonymous letters began circulating, accusing Karen of manipulating financial reports and ruling the board like a personal fiefdom. I heard from several homeowners who'd been fined for things like having mismatched patio furniture, while Karen was secretly rerouting budget lines to fund poolside cabanas on land she didn't own. And then the police showed up. 3 squad cars arrived early one morning while I was out walking the perimeter with Bernard. Officers got out, calm but serious. "We're following up on reports of unpermitted construction, unauthorized electrical connection, and potential trespassing," the lead officer explained. I welcomed them in, handed them everything: the drone footage, the financial logs, the emails. They were stunned. Later that afternoon, the contractors who had installed the pool, licensed only for commercial work in Richmond, were arrested. Turns out, none of the permits Karen claimed to have even existed. She'd fabricated authorization forms and handed them to the workers like candy. One of them told the police she promised him a cushy referral bonus from the HOA. Karen, meanwhile, doubled down. She claimed it was all a clerical error, that she was misunderstood, that she had verbal permission. Unfortunately for her, cameras don't misunderstand, and neither did the authorities. Within days, the county issued a citation ordering the HOA to cease use of the pool immediately and begin deconstruction. Karen appealed, naturally. But when the city zoning department got involved, they discovered something much worse. Karen had been dipping into HOA reserves for years under vague project titles like landscape sustainability and community morale initiatives. Now it wasn't just a local dispute. It was a criminal investigation. By the end of the second week, I watched from my porch as county officers locked the gate to the pool area and tagged it with a red condemned structure notice. A news chopper flew overhead. HOA members stood behind police tape in lawn chairs, murmuring like they were at the premiere of a disaster movie. And Karen locked her Facebook profile and stopped returning press inquiries. But the damage was done. Her carefully built suburban kingdom had cracked, and now the whole world was watching it crumble. The courtroom was packed. Local reporters lined the back wall like vultures with microphones. HOA members filled every bench, some looking angry, others pale and ashamed. The rest of the room buzzed with the quiet tension of people realizing they'd signed up for a potluck and wound up at a public execution. At the front, behind polished mahogany, sat Judge Elkins, a man whose glasses perpetually slid down his nose and who already looked like he'd rather be fishing. My attorney, Bernard Finch, stood beside me, freshly shaved and grinning like a man who'd just sniffed blood. Karen sat across the aisle with a tight-jawed legal team, and the expression of someone who'd just discovered her parachute was a backpack. The charges had stacked up beautifully. We had them on: unlawful trespass, unpermitted construction, misappropriation of HOA funds, fraudulent misrepresentation, illegal utility tapping, and a glorious bonus count of willful property destruction. The prosecution started with the easy hits: drone footage, surveyor reports, Greg's security cam that caught Karen directing workers like she was running a Hollywood set. Then came the big blow: the financial records from Owen, the ex-treasurer. Every doctored invoice, every line item padded and misfiled, every shady check written to cash and funneled through HOA reserves. Karen's defense crumbled like overcooked cake. Her lawyer, sweating visibly, tried to argue verbal consent from me. Judge Elkins didn't even look up when he answered. "This is Virginia Civil Code, counselor, not a neighborhood bake sale. Verbal consent doesn't authorize infrastructure development on private property." Then came Karen's turn on the stand. It was cinematic. She wore a muted gray blazer and spoke softly, performing a weak smile for the jury, like this was an apology tour instead of a fraud trial. "It was never my intention to harm Mr. Randall," she said. "We simply misunderstood the boundary lines. It was all done in the spirit of community." Bernard stood up so fast his chair almost flipped. "Your Honor, if I may." And then he unleashed. The emails with her calling me deadweight landowner, the HOA minutes where she overrode votes, the hand-signed order for the margarita machine she billed as hydration unit, child-friendly. Every lie, every manipulation laid bare like a roast on the table. By the time the jury recessed, you could hear the tension drop like a bad beat at a middle school dance. They were gone for 46 minutes. When they returned, the verdict was unanimous. Karen Merrill, guilty on all civil counts with personal liability for $2.1 million in damages. Sunnybrook Rise HOA, liable as an entity for an additional $600,000 for enabling the construction, failure of internal oversight, and gross negligence. The contractors fined and suspended from operations pending state licensing review. Karen personally banned from holding any fiduciary or leadership role in a registered HOA or nonprofit in the state of Virginia for life. And my favorite detail: court-ordered demolition of the pool and restoration of the land within 60 days. All expenses paid by the HOA. Karen stood there, frozen, as the judge laid it out. You hijacked private property. You abused trust. You funded it with money meant for landscaping and streetlights, and you hosted a party like it was some goddamn resort. The court does not tolerate delusion masquerading as leadership. You're lucky you're not walking out of here in cuffs. And then, as a final twist, Judge Elkins added, "The plaintiff is further granted permission to install signage at the former pool site of his choosing, provided it complies with local zoning ordinances." I turned to Bernard. "Oh, I've got plans for that sign." 62 days after the verdict, I watched the last chunk of concrete from the unauthorized HOA pool get hoisted into a dumpster. The demolition crew, hired by the HOA under court order, worked fast and quiet, heads down like they were doing a burial. In some ways, they were. The artificial oasis that Karen had called her civic masterpiece was now nothing but torn earth and the faint, lingering scent of chlorine. And in its place, grass. Fresh, green, evenly rolled sod, laid down by a landscaping team I personally hired. It looked clean, peaceful, and real. No banners, no tiki torches, just a freshly seeded lawn reclaiming its rightful space. Right at the edge of the new grass, I installed my court-approved sign. A beautiful polished cedar plank with 2 engraved lines. Private property, entry by invitation only. Loved the swim, tried diving into legal fees. People stopped to take selfies with it, but that wasn't the real surprise. A few weeks later, on a sunny Saturday in September, my friends, neighbors, the sane ones, and family gathered for a private event of my own. HOA Free Fest 2025, I called it. There was music, barbecue, a moon bounce, and yes, a pool. Not a permanent one, just a big inflatable monstrosity in the shape of a smiling frog, parked squarely on the correct side of my property. My kids loved it. Greg brought fireworks. Bernard showed up in Hawaiian shorts and socks, declaring he was retired from litigation but not from lemonade. The best part? I'd made a cardboard cutout of Karen, complete with plastic sun hat and clipboard, and placed it at the party's entrance holding a foam sign, "Welcome to Not Your Land." Guests took turns posing next to it, mock signing permission slips. Even Owen from the ex-HOA board showed up, drink in hand. "You know," he said, laughing, "in a weird way, Karen brought the neighborhood together. Just not the way she expected." And I couldn't help but agree. We weren't just celebrating a legal win. We were celebrating boundaries, personal, legal, and emotional ones. It was funny in the end how something so ridiculous had reminded people what actual community looked like. As the sun dipped low and people waved their goodbyes, I stood at the edge of my restored land, watching the frog pool deflate slowly like a giant exhaling after a long joke. I grinned, not bad for a guy who just wanted to be left alone.